Hello and welcome to another live stream edition of the John Keim Report. Do me a favor, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube later, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can also find us there at Ampire Media, and you should know how to spell it by now, Ampire. And if you want to become a club member, go to the Ampire Media YouTube page, see the word join, go from there. For you gold members, I'll be doing a private Zoom on Wednesday night this week because I'm going to be out of town Thursday and Friday, but Wednesday night, doing the private Zoom. We'll go 7:30 again. So hopefully you can join me there. Those gold chats have been very fun and very informative, I hope, for the people involved. Anyways, tonight we're going to wrap up just the season, look ahead. But as you can see, I'm joined by the voice of the Commanders, Bram Weinstein. But Bram, today we were talking about this. I don't view this as earth-shattering news, but Cliff Kingsbury is going to stay.
Yeah.
I think it's a good development. I never thought he was going to leave, but now we know for sure he's not. So what does that mean to you?
I mean, I'd rather hear you talk about it because you actually spoke to him, at length. And I never really did, because in my position, I don't really ask those questions. Like, it's kind of not my business, and so I think you kind of knew that it was extremely unlikely that he was going to take another job. And I think he signaled that in the interview he did with you. He signaled it by taking no interviews before the playoff run was over. He is being paid by the Cardinals still, so it was never going to be about money. And I think continuity for this young quarterback is enormous. So even as we get to, I'm not surprised today that that's the choice. I'm really glad it's the choice. That was an incredible first year together for those two, and I can't wait to see what year 2 is with them.
Yeah, and the reason why, from the beginning, before training camp, I was hearing how much he liked being in Washington and how it was unlikely that he would look to leave after just 1 year. But what you don't know is, as the season progresses, they're having a lot of success. And what does that, does that open other eyes around the league? Do people give you maybe a quicker second look than they would have ordinarily? And then, the Jaden Daniels success, developing a young quarterback or helping develop it. And that starts you make you wonder a little bit. But all along, I kept hearing the same thing about how happy he was here, that he's still getting paid by Arizona. That's a big key. So he doesn't have to rush to another job. And when guys take their second jobs, they're very selective about what they're looking for in most cases. And that's why I say, look at the Saints, that wouldn't have any appeal to a guy in his spot. Because if he does, somebody brought up on Twitter, I think Bobby Sloak was a hot name last year. Now he's not. Bobby Sloak had 1 year calling plays. This guy's got a long history of it. He's not in the same boat as Bobby Sloak. Could it go south? Sure. But then maybe he wasn't, whatever. And he's still getting paid by Arizona, even if it does.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to go south with Jaden Daniels. But the big thing, Bram, he has a quarterback that he loves working with in Jaden Daniels. And he told me it would take a lot for me to leave this kid. He also told me it's not going to be about the money. I didn't get back. He told me that he didn't get back into this to become a head coach again. We know that he would like to. He said that he would like to at some point. I think when that time comes, you want to see what have I learned that I can apply to my next job? Like Dan Quinn is doing that right now. So he's in a good spot. And you figure with Jaden Daniels, with Dan Quinn, that you're going to, and Adam Peters, that you can continue building on this success. And the last thing, Bram, I look at part of the reason Ben Johnson wanted to stay in Detroit last year had nothing to do with whatever you've read or heard. It had everything to do with he wanted to see it through. And in Detroit, he liked being in Detroit. He liked being the OC there, give it one more shot. And it didn't work out. And then you're ready to leave. But I think there's some of that with Kingsbury that you want to see, where can you take this after a couple of years? And then if the right job opens up, then you can go. But he's in a good spot. He knows it. There are a lot of things with that head coaching job that I think would be very frustrating for him. And one of the things he's liked being here is developing relationships with players and other coaches that he felt like he couldn't do as much of in Arizona because you're being torn in so many directions. So, and it's, so there you go.
There's a couple things with him. When he said something, and it was in the middle of the season, it was probably around the Arizona game, when he said, I bet my career on him, Kyler Murray. When he said that, I went, oh, this guy isn't about jumping around finding the next thing. He wants to be somewhere where he thinks he can win and impact a high-level player and direct their career. And he's got that again. He's actually been very lucky. Like he's worked with Pat Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, Johnny Manziel, like Jaden Daniels, Kyler Murray. Like think about the lineage, Caleb Williams. Like think about the lineage of high-level players he's had the opportunity to work with. So I think I know what he wants. And the other thing too is, and this is, he said something last week, like they finally opened up a little bit last week. Dan Quinn talked about how he finally revealed, we heard the dismissiveness early in the season and talked about that. He had really put his head down and ignored that stuff throughout the year. And Cliff said something really interesting last week heading into the Philadelphia game, where he said, we had this new team. It was a fresh start for all these new players. And he said it was a fresh start for me too, because whatever perceptions they had of me going in. And so that means he knows what's been said about him. He knows how he's perceived. He knows that the go in Arizona didn't go well because they didn't win any playoff games. And they collapsed at the end of multiple seasons at the end of the year, and the offense went away. And so all of a sudden, he knows that he's being, portrayed this way. Right. You know how that goes. Like, you need to prove to the people that you're not what they say you are. And when he said that, it was a good, fresh start for me, too, that whatever you thought of me, too, at least let's work together and figure it out. And what I learned about him this year is why I'm really glad he's back. He's a massive competitor. He's kind of quiet and but he's a really, really engaged competitor. His work ethic's off the charts. He's a film junkie. Like, I didn't know that about him. And that was not the perception of him coming in. So I'm very, very glad that he is back.
One of the things that when they hired him, if you remember, we had Josh Weinfuss, our ESPN Cardinals reporter. One of the things he did say is that he loves getting in there early and just getting into watching film and being a grinder. Like, that part appeals to him more than maybe doing all the other head coaching stuff. And I think that's why he's been so happy here, is because that's what he can focus on, is all of that. I also think, Bram, too, and I think one of the things that's good here, obviously you can continue building on what you did this year with Jaden Daniels. But I think it's good for Jaden because he has a guy, like they both have a guy that they're working with in each other who works the same way. Like, and I don't think, I think if he left and they elevated Brian Johnson, I'd say he works really hard too, right? But I do know like those two have a good working relationship because Jaden's texting him all the time with like clips of plays he sees on YouTube or from other games. And, and then, but they both get in, like Kingsbury's the first coach in, Daniels is the first player in. That's why, like, Kingsbury told me that he'd never had a player before who asked him to do walkthroughs in the hotel ballroom the day of a game. Like, and he's like, great, and so that, I think they develop a trust, and I think they just have a healthy working respect for one another. And I think that's really, in addition to the play calling are great, but it's so much of this is like when you change coordinators, you've got to maintain a strong working relationship, and it does take a minute, and they have a good one.
Yeah, they do. I'm really glad, that he's back. I'm glad that the staff essentially back. We learned a lot about all of this group. I thought what was really interesting yesterday at the end of season press conference, like I've been waiting for, on some level, there's a front that, like, we all know that what happened this year is a massive success. They don't want to say it and they don't want to admit it, but it is. And everybody will acknowledge that with how many different players showed up here, to new front office, new coach, rookie quarterback. It was illogical and practically unprecedented what they did. It's one of the greatest turnarounds in the history of the league. And the fact that they made it that far should be celebrated. I know it was a thud the way they went out. And I was waiting for a day later, because I knew in the locker room was tough, because they didn't expect it to go like that. No. And the end of a season is very emotional. It's hard to deal with. And because it's just over. And it's hard to describe if you're not in it, like what that feels like when it's just literally over. But yesterday I thought with 24 hours that they would come out and say, take a victory lap a little bit. They did not. Like, that was That was my biggest takeaway of this. You would have thought you were at a funeral yesterday.
Yes,
Quinn
right.
and Peters, how distraught they were
talking
about it, which does, lean me back into, I'm glad this staff is back together because they're not satisfied. At some point, I'm sure they will be reflective about the whole thing because it was amazing what happened this year, and it's not going to be replicated the way they won the games. And it was a first that we got to see this group together. But the first thing out of Quinn's mouth is we have scars now. Peters looked shaken by it.
Like, God, yeah,
they were really they were wearing it on their sleeve yesterday. So they're not ready for any victory laps.
No, for sure. And I think that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because all along, there's a couple of things I want to talk about too, that you hear the phrase house money. And there are definitely some people, higher up who might feel like that, right? And there was some feeling like that. But and even some of the players, like they knew only because they weren't expected to be there. But I never ever sensed that they're like, hey, we're just happy to be here. Like next year, we're going to build on this. I never got that sense from anybody. Like you had guys, the good thing for them is they have a lot of veterans who understand how hard it is to get there. Bobby Wagner, Zach Ertz, Jeremy Reeves, talking to him, like he told me that he was crying after that game. He said, I've never cried after a game before, but they know like they had never been in that position before. And he'd been in the league since 2018. There's never any guarantee that you get back. But I also think, there's an expectation that's been set that these guys really have embraced. And I think that's the fantastic thing. If you remember, with Ron, after his first year and they made the playoffs, what did we hear the next year? Maybe the worst thing we did was making the playoffs because it put it at a different level. Like the best thing they did here was raise the expectation level.
They want that.
That's what you want. And that's what they've done. But I like you're exactly right. Like I didn't talk to anybody. It's like, yeah, this was great because we got to this point. It was like, this sucked because we got to this point and lost. And I think they appreciate what they've done. What you heard a lot of is how happy they were to see the fan base coming back. That's what a lot of them talked about. And then the other thing, Bram, too, the one good thing for the organization, unless some of the other assistants, and I don't know that they would, but there's a lot of continuity, even in the front office with Lance Newmark being back. And I think that's a good thing too, because I think he's a huge, huge help to Adam Peters. Like that is a tough job that he has. And like Josh Harris is a very good owner, but he also expects a lot. That means you better have a really good right-hand man. And he does in Newmark. So like him being back too is a big bonus. Like this, you have, for the first time in a long time, you have an off season where it can just be about what players do you want to get?
Yeah. And the one other thing on kind of the big picture one, last week, I mentioned this earlier, where they finally acknowledged outside noise perception, all that stuff. They've totally had put blinders up to the whole thing the whole time. And my job is to tell their story through their eyes. Right. So I can encompass, how the fans feel about it, how I felt about it, but I need to consistently talk from their point of view. It's their story to tell. And consistently, I learned very early, don't even bother with Dan Quinn asking him about, like, isn't this amazing that they did this or you did that? Or he's just like, I'm worried about this game. I really, we could talk about that another time. You want to go grab a beer in April and talk about it? We can do that. I'm not going to do it. But he finally acknowledged it right before the Philly game, where he did the line of, I felt like we were dismissed after the Tampa game, and F you for saying that about us. And they've lived up to that. There is literally, you hear this every time you get new groups in. There are slogans. We're going to change this. There's going to be a new culture change. It's all new, but you have to live up to it. They did. They literally did. And that I think it's not rare. It's just unusual. People say they're going to do these things. It's the right thing to say. They paint the walls with their slogans. They put up whatever they want to do. And then half the time by the end of it, you're like, I don't know, man. It doesn't feel like, but in every way, with the standards that Peters and Quinn set, they lived up to it. Yep. And I keep thinking back now through the year, every time he did a press availability, the first thing out of his mouth was he explained what the day was about. It was like that detailed, what the day was about. And he was communicating with us in a way that I'm sure he was communicating with the team. He, in every way, shape, and form, was the relationship builder we heard that he was. This is why I'm so excited about the future. Like, it is disappointing what happened the other day, and I feel like karmically they didn't deserve a score like that. The way they played, they did, but like just because of how hard they fought, I hated that score looked that way, because all these people who paid no attention to him and dismissed them got some like fuel to go, see, I told you, like they didn't belong there, and that part bothers me. But in every way, shape, and form, all the things they set out to do and said they would do in year one, they did and more. And while they don't want to celebrate it, or at least outwardly want to celebrate it, I'm willing to sit back and go, that was amazing. But I'm with you here. I want the standard to be different. It shouldn't be a one-off, and we shouldn't be throwing a parade for getting close to the Super Bowl. We should throw the parade after we win it.
Well, and I want to address this too, because someone's kind of doubting, I think, what we're saying about how they took it. You know, like behind the scenes, they're saying it publicly, and say not in a gloating fashion, but reflecting on the last year. They aren't alive if they haven't sat back and gone, "Whoa, that was amazing."
Yeah,
I would say this: I think the owners, I think guys like Mitch Rails and all them, but I'm telling you, having been in the locker room there, and I think maybe you get to that point down the road. On Sunday night and Monday, they were absolutely not at that point. And because I saw
the GM wasn't, the players weren't, they were going to win that game.
Right. And I saw the tears in the players' eyes after the game. They're not sitting back there at that point. And it's not just saying what they're saying publicly. We do talk to them without the recorder going, right? You know how they feel. Now, can they say it was a great year? Yeah, of course. They should say that, because it was. And can they say they were excited about what happened? Of course. But, the players who've been around understand. And there's a difference, too, in this Tech Mark B said it. There's a difference, too, between saying it was amazing versus saying, hey, this, we're going to be back there. Like that, the point is, yes, they can feel it was amazing. But the other part is they know how hard it is to get to that point, and there's no guarantee in the future that it gets there. But the more continuity you have and the more talent you add, the more likely you get back there. And I think that's where their focus is how do you do that? And I think that's what it, also, Bram, a couple of people have asked about Cosme surgery.
Yeah.
I don't know how, here's what I would say. Anytime they come out of it, what are you going to hear? It went well. It's really down the road when you hear more. So he had his surgery today. Just there you go. And, I think the other thing that I don't think people realize, he hurt his ankle on that play too. And that was the first thing he thought was hurt. He didn't realize the knee was hurt until he got up and walked away. But how it went, we'll find out more later. And it's really going to be markers along the way more so than the immediate day, because every time there's a surgery, it's 100% you're going to hear it went well. So you got to wait for longer to know how it really went. So
let me ask you this one. I think this is a good question to ask. Has Lattimore lost his fastball? Why or why not? It's a good question.
It is a good question. And I'll be honest, I don't know, because here's the problem. We're judging him based off, he came here, he had the hamstring injury when he came, he dealt with the hamstring injury when he was here. And is this who he is now? I don't know, because this is all we've seen. So are we seeing a guy in decline, or do we see a guy battling a hamstring injury? I don't think we're going to know that until the summertime. Right? I don't know. And I think it's easy to say that he did, but I don't know how much that hamstring was bothering him. Lattimore does not like talking to the media. So I don't know how it is.
That's an understatement.
Listen, man, they literally had to get him out of his car the Wendy to come talk to us. And because he didn't, and that's okay. Geez, I'm dropping my mic here, but that's okay. It's his prerogative. He doesn't have to like talking to us. I don't blame him. But what we don't know is from him, and he's as they say, a dog-ass competitor. He's not going to say, yes, he's not going to sit there and blame that. That's just not how he operates. So I think that's a hard question to know. And I think Blaine says it too. We're not going to know until next season. And then when he's, because for example, on the one long one, the fourth down one against AJ Brown, when he turned and ran, he did not look like he had in the past. Is that a function of not having played a lot? Is it a function of losing a little bit because of hamstring? Is it injuries catching up to you at this point in your career? I don't know that, but I will say, for anybody wondering, Adam Peters is pretty clear. He's going to be here next year. they have confidence that he will be that guy, and he needs to be that guy for them. Because if he's not, it's an expensive miss.
I'm going to hear out. Give him a full off season.
Yeah,
hopefully he gets healthy. Give him a full another year in the defense. That's not changing. Joe Witt's back. The staff's back. They obviously needed corner no matter what. He, at his peak, is a high level player. I agree. Let's get into the middle of next season, and then we'll talk about it, and let's see where he is. All right, here's another one for you. Between Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, do you think both come back next year?
I do. And for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, they can both still play. And when you look at Ertz, like, look at what he did. The problem with the offense was not Zach Ertz. He was a help. He was a security blanket in a big way for Jaden Daniels. And there's a reason why he had, I looked at the stat yesterday. In the NFL this year, he had 10 fourth down catches in the NFL, most by a tight end. Like third red zone, he was one of the most productive tight ends. Like, that's a big help. Even if, let's say, I would still go out and look for another tight end because I didn't see enough from Ben Sinnott to automatically say, oh, he's going to develop into this. Maybe he does, but it's not going to stop me from looking for someone else who can supplement what Zach Ertz does. And maybe, because when he came here this year, the whole, Dan Quinn said, the thought was, red zone, third down, whatever. And then he kind of elevated his game to be able to do more in more spots. Well, maybe you can just use him in certain spots next year, but get somebody else in here that helps save some wear and tear. But he adds value. Like, he adds a lot of value. He's a very respected voice for Daniels. I think, I would want to keep that. But again, I would still look for somebody maybe later in the draft or something. And as far as Wagner goes, he, again, invaluable voice in the locker room, and he still can play. And I know it's funny because I hear stuff about like lateral stuff and all that. To me, a bigger problem on that defense is you've got to have somebody who can do consistently set the edge at defensive end, but while also being a pass rush threat. And I think that's one of the things they're going to have to get. And it's not, as I was talking to someone today, it's not just about forcing somebody inside. It's about pushing back and either forcing it wider and allowing help to get over there, or forcing it back inside, but making it a difficult run. And I don't think they did that consistently enough. So, but with Wagner, you still saw him being effective. Sometimes maybe he's going to duck around a linebacker or whatever, or guard or lineman and maybe that gets you out of your gap a little bit, but he's still able to get in, make some plays behind the ball or the line of scrimmage. And I do think his value in the locker room is high. I also think they really like Jordan McGee. So I think if something happens, you do have a guy there, a young guy that you're trying to develop. So I think that's a good thing too. What do you think, Bram?
On Wagner, I think it's a no-brainer to bring him back for his leadership qualities, assuming he wants to play. And to your point about McGee, who they loved coming in, he got injured in the preseason. He had injuries throughout the year. He never played as much as I think they would have liked him to do. So we're going to get a do-over with him. And so I could see a scenario by which that McGee plays more and allows Wagner to play less on the field, and you utilize Wagner a little more, not sparingly, but just I don't think they would ask him to take on as much as he did. I do think he's such a good locker room leader. I have a hard time buying you don't want him back. Correct. And Ertz, I would say this, I like him. He obviously turned into a really good productive player, especially in the red zone for them. But I would just say across the board, I think we can all agree they need to get more explosive playmakers to add to Terry McLaurin, whether that's receiver, running back, or tight end. And to whatever degree they can add more explosive playmakers, that's where some of these decisions will come in. So I'm happy if Zach Ertz comes back, but do they have a younger option that can get more yards after the catch, could be a more explosive player at that position? Is that an option for them? Well, then I think it's a possibility they might go in a different direction there. If they can get more explosive players out of running back or wide receiver and they add there, maybe they just look at Ertz as this is just a great, let's keep him here. He knows the quarterback. He knows our offense. He's really productive. We think we can get those explosive plays in other spots. So I think that one's just a little complicated as to what are the options to upgrade the explosiveness of the skill position players in general. And if it comes at receiver and running back, I would see Ertz back. But if there's an opportunity to get a young, explosive tight end, then I don't know what Adam Peters will do.
Well, I think the hard part for that point is if the young explosive, that's in the draft. And I think, which round are you willing to do that? And, what else are you going to need in the draft too? So I think that's hard. And by that point, Ertz would probably want to know, what are your plans for me?
Yes.
So, but I think you can do both, Bram. That's why I say, I still think you can sign Ertz back and say, listen, we're still looking to do this. So just so you know, if there's a possibility of this, and let him decide if he wants to be part of that. But you can always use another guy there, because again, they didn't get enough production at that spot beyond him.
Well, I would say this too. Like John Bates is up too, right? He's up. Yeah. He's up in free agency. So you've got to make some choices here. And Bates is a really good blocking tight end. Like Sinnott has to become that to warrant getting another receiving tight end and have Ertz back. So they've got tough decisions, I think, at that position group to make.
Yes, and I think the big key is finding another dynamic player, whether it's running back, receiver, or whatever. I agree. But I would look for that more so from receiver or running back, because I think that's the kind of guy you need. Like, it'd be great to have it, but because for these guys, they want to get the ball down the field, and and I think you have a better chance, obviously, with another receiver, a speedy receiver opposite Terry, and then running back, like we saw with Jahmyr Gibbs, added to that offense. And I think Washington's probably glad they didn't see more of Jahmyr Gibbs 2 weeks ago. So
they need their Jahmyr Gibbs, honestly. I want to address this one comment where he says you'd put explosive skill players more important than upgraded O-line. No,
nobody said that.
We're going position by position at this point. Zach Ertz came up. These are the scenarios I'm thinking about in the tight end room. I think offensive line is a must upgrade unit for sure. And to go back to the Cosme injury, he was one of the certainties moving into 2025. That put a little crimp in the plans, and they have to think about this, because at bare minimum, he's going to miss the offseason program. Bare minimum.
Right.
Like, we don't know when he's going to be ready for the regular season and what condition he'll be in. So that one's a little trickier than I thought it was going to be. But to answer your question, no, I don't put explosive skill players as more important than the upgraded O-line. I think they need both, and it's equally as important.
Listen, I think with this O-line, if you had another explosive receiver, you still have one of the best offenses in the NFL. And so, I think whatever you add, it's not, but I will agree, I would get the offensive line as much to improve the run game for sure. Make it consistent, not make it rely. By the way, Tech Mark B wants to clarify, and I agree with him on this. Said what he was talking about when I brought that up earlier was that not resting on their laurels, but looking at what they accomplished has to be fuel for them. And that's what I'm taking from the way they have come off all year long. He's 1,000% right on that. I think it is fuel. And I think, again, I talked to Jeremy Reeves about this yesterday, and his fuel was that final score really pisses him off. So it's going to drive him. So yes, you're exactly right that is fuel for them for sure. So, so we got about 2 minutes left here, Bram. But again, so we're kind of on agreement there. Real quick on the O-line, what level of priority would you put that?
High, very high. Especially with the, inability to know the availability of Cosme. I think it's a really big deal now, at least early in the season. I think Brandon Coleman's a keeper. Is he their left tackle? I'm not really sure. I'd like to hear from them. I think Biotish is their center moving forward. I love Allegretti as a primary backup or a starter if there are upgraded positions around them. And with Wiley, again, I think there just needs to be an upgrade at the position. If there's a decent guard in free agency, I would definitively think about doing that. Drafting a tackle late in the first round feels pretty obvious to me. If the right ones pop, like remember last year, they were gone. They wanted to move back into the first round and trade for a tackle, but they were gone. So we're going to have to see how the draft board goes. I think there's going to be a lot of changes on the offensive line for sure. That's the best way I can put it at this point.
I think a couple of changes. And by the way, and someone else, I wanted to bring this up, going back to Wagner. Someone's all 22 said Wagner looks slow. First of all, I don't know who that was. However, what I would say is sometimes there's some things that outweigh, other things. And I think for him, his value is extremely high in that locker room, and guys respect the hell out of him, and he can still play. And I think the other point to that is if he comes in here and, like you said, Bram, and they want to share or maybe they start to see some slippage, you have Jordan McGee here, and they really do like him. So, so I think you can. I mean, I'm always looking to add players. One thing that I would be clear, the last thing I'll say on this is a group that's highly places a great deal of emphasis on competition, and if that means doing something here or there, with the offensive line, with something like with you sign Nick Allegretti and you like him, but if you bring another guard, maybe it's like, hey, this guy's just better, beat him out, right? That's how you improve. But with Wagner still has a lot of value to them, and I don't think that can be underscored. So
100%.
So, anyways, listen, folks, that's it. We got to run tonight. We're keeping it to a half hour. Appreciate you guys tuning in. I will be back on Thursday with another episode. I'll be talking to Nikki Javala of the Washington Post. And so she and I will be talking about some off-season stuff and getting you guys ready for more. And here comes the fun stuff, man. Like, 29th pick, not sexy, but there's a lot of ways they could go. And then a lot of stuff to do in free agency. So we're going to have a fun off-season talking about this and talking about a team, Bram, that came off of 14 wins. Wow. So anyways, folks, there you go. Thanks for joining me, Bram. Thanks for coming on as always. And I will talk to you next time.